Madam Speaker, Mr. President of the Republic of South Africa, Deputy President of the Republic, Cabinet colleagues, the Governor of the South African Reserve Bank, Governor number 10, from Governor number 8, honorable members, MECs of Finance, guests. I have a special guest somewhere, Madam Speaker. I have a special guest who used to be a member of this house, and now she is hosting Wamitwa Wabumbiri. I don't know where she is. Oh, there she is. Your Majesty. Fellow South Africans, goeiemiddag. Sanbonan, Molwe, Nhlika. On October 9, 2018, I stood before a judge of the High Court and took an oath of office. I said, I quote, "I will be faithful to the Republic of South Africa and will obey, respect, and uphold the Constitution and all other law in the Republic. I undertake to hold my office as Minister with honor and dignity, to be a true and faithful counselor, and to perform the functions of my office conscientiously and to the best of my ability," unquote. Today I submit before this House the national budget. It reflects, to the best of my judgment, the nation's financial situation. It is in the interest of our people and our country, and not in the narrow objectives of any political party. It is to safeguard the sound financial status of the Republic. I do this in my role as Minister of Finance, performing my duties and responsibilities as the guardian of the nation's finances. Today, I hereby table, firstly, the budget speech, the 2019 budget review, the 2019 estimates of national expenditure, the division of revenue bill, the appropriation bill, and the public audit excess fee bill. Madam Speaker, in the 2019 State of the Nation address, our President set out an ambitious agenda for our nation. It is an agenda that speaks to the South Africa that we can be. It is a task list for all of us to follow. It lays out a series of interventions that will put South Africa on a bold new path. How do we make this renewal a reality? As usual, Mr. President, I turn to the good book for guidance. So in Zechariah 8, verse 12, it says, and I quote, "For the seed shall be prosperous." Listen carefully. "The vine shall give a fruit, and the ground shall give their increase, and the heavens shall give their dew. And I will cause the remnant of these people to possess all of these things," unquote. Where's Reverend Misha now? As a small part-time farmer, I know that in order for the people to possess all these things, we have to plant anew. It is time for us to sow the seed of renewal and growth. But for the seed to be prosperous, as Zechariah says, we must first cultivate the soil. Once we have planted the seed, we must nurture it, water it, and protect it from the extremes, the elements, and time. Despite our best efforts, sometimes ravages and risks such as pests or rot could attack our green shoots. But we must persevere. We must prune and pluck away at the rot until there is growth. This we must do as a collective. In this regard, I'm grateful to fellow South Africans for their keen interest in the budget process. In particular, those who have taken time to send me tips for the budget. If we look after what we saw and what we have plowed and labored so tirelessly since the founding of our democracy, it will grow and the seed will bear fruit. However, if we abandon our fields, the seeds we plant will wither. A few years ago, Madam Speaker, one of my predecessors, Minister Trevor Manuel, he handed out succulent plums to the members of this House to demonstrate the times of plenty were upon us then. Today we walk into this House with an iconic South African plant, the Alu Ferox. This is what it looks like. This. This is one of the best-known South African plants. It has a long history of medicinal use. It is resilient, sturdy, and drought-resistant. It withstands the elements. We must take the bitter with the sweet. Today I bring you a seed to prove that if we plant anew, we can return to those plum times of Minister Trevor Manuel. Madam Speaker, our President has set us on a track of renewal. But today, I will leave the poetry and the singing to the President and his opponents for later. Because the President said they're going to sing together. Including Honorable Holomisa, Malema, Likota, Maimane, and so on. So they'll sing together for us. But I'm here in my capacity as Minister of Finance to speak about the hard facts and figures. This budget is built on 6 fundamental prescripts. First, achieving a higher rate of economic growth. Second, increasing tax collection. Third, reasonable, affordable expenditure. Fourth, stabilizing and reducing the national debt. 5, reconfiguring state-owned enterprises. 6, managing the public sector wage bill. It will not be easy. There are no quick fixes, but our nation is ready for renewal. We're ready to plant the seeds of our future. In October, during the 2018 medium-term budget policy statement, I outlined our main budget fiscal outlook. At that time, we projected that in 2018-2019, the tax revenue will be 1.3 trillion rand, and that spending will be about 1.5 trillion rand. That left us with a budget deficit of 215 billion rand, or 4.3% of GDP. I said that we were at the crossroads, and that we could either go to heaven or the other way, which means to hell. Then we expected economic growth of 0.7% in 2018. This is still our estimate, but many of the risks that we warned about have unfortunately materialized. We now expect a slower but still steady recovery after the 2018 technical recession. It is expected that real GDP growth in 2019 will rise to 1.5% and then strengthen moderately to 2.1% in 2021. South Africa is a small, open economy, and we are impacted by events in the global economy. World economic growth is now expected to slow, thus constraining South Africa's export growth forecast. These macroeconomic conditions have led to a weaker economic outlook. Madam Speaker, walk along with me on a journey of how we have chosen to respond to the challenges that we face. First, we must look at the President's task list. Then we must match resources that we have to the plan. So, when I was learning about public finance, I was always taught that you first determine policy and then budget. Budget follows policy, not the other way around. So the President has set the policy framework. My duty is to give the policy framework the budget, Mr. President. In this current year, tax revenue has been revised down by 15.4 billion rand compared to our October estimate. Approximately half of the increase in the shortfall since October is due to higher than expected VAT refunds. This lowers revenue collection for the year, but it actually puts money back into the economy. The South African Revenue Service is being fixed. My thanks go to Judge Nugent and his panel for his wise counsel. Based on the recommendations of the panel, we do the following. First, a new commissioner for SARS will be appointed in the coming weeks. Secondly, a new illicit economy unit launched in August 2018 will fight the trade in illicit cigarettes and tobacco. I'm sure you saw what they did yesterday somewhere. 3, the large business unit was a major source of tax collection, and its skill was well known and renowned. Unfortunately, over the past couple of years, this capacity has been undermined. This unit will be reintroduced and will be formally launched in early April. 4, SARS is strengthening its IT team and its IT systems, as this is crucial for our tax collection efforts. 5, information sharing agreements with allies internationally will help fight against cross-border tax evasion schemes, which are all over the place. I have requested Judge Davis to assess the tax gap, which is the difference between revenue collected and what ought to have been collected. We will also review the proliferation of duty-free shops inside South Africa. There's something amazing. You come through passport control, you collect your bags, and as you walk out, you come across a duty-free shop when you've gone through passport control, coming inside the country. Very abnormal. So we have agreed to fix that as quickly as possible. Fiscal prudence requires some tax changes. We propose additional revenue measures of 15 billion rand in 2019-20. There will be a slight upward adjustment of the tax-free threshold for personal income taxes, with no change in the current personal income tax brackets. Together, this will raise 12.8 billion rand. Madam Speaker, I come now to what in this House is an exciting part of the budget speech. Excise duties on alcohol and tobacco will be increased as follows. Firstly, the excise duty on a can of beer goes up by 12 cents to 1.74 rand. Secondly, a 750 milliliter bottle of wine, including that wine that's popular amongst two political parties here, will have an excise duty of 3.15 rand, which is 22 cents more. 3, the duty on a 750 milliliter bottle of sparkling wine, sorry, Sandanas, goes up by 84 cents to 10.16 rand. 4, the duty on a bottle of whiskey will go up by 4.54 rand to 65.84 rand. A pack of 20 cigarettes, Deputy President, goes up by 1.14 rand to 16.66 rand. The excise duty on a typical cigar goes up by about 64 cents to 7.80 rand. I think this was the staff trying to have a go at me. There will be no change in the excise duty on sorghum beer as a retirement present to Honorable Butelis. Fuel levies will increase by 29 cents. No, Honorable Butelis, but you used to stand when Trevor Manuel made this announcement. No, I'm so unfortunate. Fuel levies will increase by 29 cents per liter for petrol and 30 cents per liter for diesel. The road accident fund levy increase is not enough to match the fund's 215 billion rand liability. We urge the Department of Transport to quickly resubmit the Road Accident Benefit Scheme Bill for Parliament's urgent consideration. It will help stabilize fuel prices. The National Treasury will work with the Department of Trade and Industry and the Department of Economic Development to explore the introduction of an export tax on scrap metal. Minister Patel, you're okay now? Thank you. The ordinary taxpayer in South Africa is fully tax compliant and pays a fair share. So in the spirit of Tuma Mina, we say paying your taxes is the right thing to do. Let me now turn to our spending projections. Since October, government has taken steps to adjust baseline expenditure downwards by a total of 50.3 billion rand over the medium term. Half of these reductions come from adjustments to government spending on compensation. 12.8 billion comes from measures to reduce spending on specific programs. Provisional allocations are made for the financial support to Eskom and the infrastructure fund. This offsets the baseline reductions, and as such, the expenditure ceiling is revised upwards by 16 billion rand over the next 3 years. In October, I quoted A Tale of Two Cities by Charles Dickens. After a few months in this role as Minister of Finance, I feel that Oliver Twist might be more appropriate this time. In short, please say, may I have some more, unquote. The SOEs pose very serious risks to the fiscal framework. Funding requests from SAA, SABC, DINEL, ESCOM, and other financially challenged state-owned enterprises have increased, with several requesting state support just to continue operating. Isn't it about time that the country asks itself the question, do we still need all these enterprises? If we do, can we manage them better? If we don't need them, what should we do? Oh, I see. Parts of the House like to say another. Okay. Madam Speaker, I said in October that we would have no holy cows when it comes to our support to state-owned enterprises. In the State of the Nation address, the President announced a clear and executable plan for electricity. At the core of this plan is a subdivision of ESCOM into 3 independent components. This will set the electricity market on a new trajectory and allow for more competition, transparency, and a focused funding model. Pouring money directly into ESCOM in its current form is not sustainable. I want to make it clear, the national government is not taking on ESCOM's debt. Let me repeat that. I want to make it clear, the national government is not taking on ESCOM's debt. ESCOM took debt in the first place. It must ultimately repay it. We are setting aside 23 billion rand a year to financially support ESCOM during its reconfiguration. The fiscal support, this is very important, the fiscal support is conditional on the appointment of an independent chief reorganization officer who will be jointly appointed by the Minister of Finance and the Minister of Public Enterprises, with a very clear mandate of delivering on the recommendations of the Presidential Task Team. We will make the necessary announcements in this regard in the coming weeks. Minister Gordhan and the strong team he has built at the Department of Public Enterprises will continue to exercise close and ongoing monitoring of ESCOM, its governance and operations. On the other state-owned enterprises, we are reviewing our framework on how we support them. Government has revised the contingency reserve upwards to 13 billion rand for 2019-2020 to respond to possible requests for financial support. This is, however, not automatic. Financial support will be based on the strategic need, but also on whether we can afford it. During this past financial year, total guarantee utilization increased by 51.1 billion rand. ESCOM used an additional 50 billion rand of its 350 billion guarantee in 2018-19. DINEL was granted a further 1 billion rand guarantee. The SAA guaranteed debt increased by 6.2 billion rand. However, there's always something shining from Africa. My congratulations go to the Land Bank, which repaid its debt, reducing government's guarantee exposure. There are other entities as well which reduce their guarantees, unfortunately, in some of the cases, as a result of appropriations. We must tighten the guarantee rules going forward. If a state-owned enterprise applies for a government guarantee for operational purposes, it will be required to appoint the CRO, as I mentioned before. And these things are normal. In the private sector, if the executive and the board are unable to get the organization going, the banks would appoint a chief restructuring officer. The eyes and ears of the shareholder, very important. As I said, this is normal practice in the private sector, and we are going to introduce that. It is the same. When provincial and municipal finances are in disarray, government can take over the running of the administration. These rules should also apply to all state-owned enterprises. Cabinet is considering a proposal to end the issuing of guarantees for operational expenses. Expiration dates on guarantees will also be strictly enforced. As the President announced, strategic equity partners will be found where feasible and possible. To summarize, in this coming year, we expect revenues to be about 1.58 trillion rand. And spending is going to be slightly higher. That means we will spend 248 billion more than what we earn. Put another way, we are borrowing about 1.2 billion rand every day, assuming that we don't borrow money on the weekends because of the Soweto Derby. This coming year, interest expenditures will be 209.4 billion rand. This is 1 billion rand per day. The expenditure and tax adjustments are designed to largely counteract the additional allocation for ESCOM and the revenue shortfall. As a result, gross national debt will still stabilize at about 60% of GDP in 2023-24, broadly in line with our October forecast. We are masters of our destiny. We are not petitioners. Our determination to regain our fiscal prudence will form the basis of our economic recovery. We will be on our way back to the plum years of Minister Manya. As we face the future, I'm reminded of the words of one of the continent's independence leaders, Ghana's President Kwame Nkrumah. He said, I quote, the task ahead is great indeed. The heavy is the responsibility. And yet, it is a noble and glorious challenge. A challenge which calls for the courage to dream, the courage to believe, the courage to dare, the courage to do, the courage to envision, the courage to fight, the courage to work, the courage to believe, to achieve the highest excellencies and the fullest greatness of people. Dare we ask for more in life, unquote. Restoring our finances and fixing our state-owned enterprises will take a lot of courage, but it can be done. Madam Speaker, the budget remains redistributive. Taxes raised in wealthier areas fund poorer provinces and municipalities. In this budget, 47.9% of nationally raised funds are allocated to national government, 43% to provinces, and 9.1% to local government over the medium term, after providing for debt service costs and the contingency reserve. Pro-poor spending continues to grow in real terms. Let me start my presentation on the government spending priorities by taking you through the key interventions government is making to reduce compensation spending. The public sector wage bill is unsustainable. We must shift expenditure to investment. National and provincial compensation budgets will be reduced by 27 billion rand over the next 3 years. The first step, if you could just listen, the first step is to allow older public servants who want to do so to retire early and gracefully. This will save an estimated 4.8 billion rand in 2019-20, 7.5 billion in 2020-21, and 8 billion in 21-22. In time, this will be complemented by limits on overtime and bonus payments, as well as pay progression. I'll be commencing conversations very soon with the Minister of International Relations and Cooperation, together with the President, to deal with the system of staffing in our diplomatic missions, which is difficult to justify and should be reviewed urgently. As a gesture of goodwill of Parliament, and the provincial legislatures and the executive at public entities, they will not be receiving any salary increases this financial year. My colleague, the Minister of Public Service Administration, will outline details of the early retirement framework during the course of this week. The budget proposes total non-interesting spending over the next 3 years of 5.87 trillion rand. This after taking into account measures taken over the 3 years to consolidate public finances. The largest allocations are 1.2 trillion rand for learning and culture, 717 billion for health services, including the National Health Insurance, and nearly 900 billion for social development. The President set out these 5 tasks: accelerate inclusive economic growth and create jobs, improve the education system and develop the skills that we need now and into the future, improve the conditions of life for all South Africans, especially the poor, fight corruption and state capture, strengthen the capacity and capability of the state to address the needs of the people. Mr. President, let me illustrate how the budget responds to the priorities you set for us. The private sector is a key engine of job creation. Government's policy actions aim to remove policy uncertainty so that confidence returns to economic agents. The 300 billion rand worth of pledges made at the investment conference last year demonstrate that there is pent-up private sector demand if we grab hold of the opportunity. Visa requirements are being relaxed, accompanied by administrative measures to make it easier for tourists to visit and invest in South Africa. We've also increased the income eligibility threshold for the highly successful employment tax incentive scheme. Jobs for 1.1 million young South Africans are supported by this program. Hashtag data costs must fall. The Minister of Communications will shortly be issuing policy directives to ICASA for the licensing of the spectrum. I'll work relentlessly with the Minister until this matter is brought to close at last. This includes resourcing ICASA for this mandate. Government has allocated 19.8 billion rand for industrial incentives of which 600 million has gone to the clothing and textile competitiveness program. This will support 35,500 existing jobs and create approximately 25,000 new jobs over the next 3 years. The Jobs Fund is a vital component to private sector job creation. The fund has disbursed 4.6 billion rand in grant funding and created well over 200,000 jobs since its inception. The allocation to this fund will rise over the next 3 years to 1.1 billion. 481.6 billion is allocated to the Small Enterprise Development Agency to expand the small business incubation program, Honorable Zulu. A robust debate on land is taking place in South Africa. We are supporting private sector investments in agriculture by emerging farmers. 1.8 billion is allocated for the implementation of the 262 priority land reform projects over the next 3 years. 3.7 billion is set aside to assist emerging farmers seeking to acquire land to farm, not for weekend specials. The Land Bank will support smallholders and leverage partnerships with other financial institutions. It aims to disburse 3 billion rand in the next fiscal year. I received a number of tips from fellow South Africans proposing changes to policy to encourage the commercial growing and processing of the green thing. For the export market, I'm unable to pronounce this thing here. So this clearly I will have to pass the ball on to the leadership to deal with it. But many people out there say, make this thing legal so that it can be for the export market. But learning and culture receives the largest share of spending as government continues to provide access to quality basic and higher education, developing skills, providing training, and contributing to social cohesion. Over 30 billion rand is allocated to build new schools and maintain schooling infrastructure. An additional 2.8 billion rand is added to the school infrastructure backlogs grant to replace pit latrines at over 2,400 schools. But to make certain that these schools are effective centers of learning will also require parents to be visible and constructive part in the governance of schools. I was saying to the workers who were demonstrating outside that the parents must not be afraid to do homework with their children so they participate in the learning process. Ningayisabe homework, honorable members. Fully subsidized education training for the poor is the government's flagship higher education intervention. Over the medium term, government will spend 111.2 billion rand to ensure that 2.8 million deserving students from poor and working class backgrounds obtain their qualifications at universities and TVET colleges. Finally, the global renown of South Africa's art and culture is an expression of our soft power and our heritage. Our public finance choices should reflect an intention to preserve and add to our cultural canon. Officials from the National Treasury and the Department of Arts and Culture will consider proposals for the development of a new National State Theatre, a new National Museum, and also consider financial support for the National Archives and National Symphony Orchestra and Ballet Theatre Troupe. I need to make a declaration. I'm a patron of the Ballet Theatre. In the fight against poverty and inequality, government has allocated 567 billion for social grant payments. In 2019, the grant values will increase as follows. 80 Rand increase from Dende, old age, disability, war veterans, and care dependency grants. A number of ordinary members here, I'm sure, will be getting Dende very soon. 240 Rand increase for foster care grant to 1,000 Rand. The child support grant will increase to 420 Rand in April and to 430 in October. In health, we need simple, effective interventions. We need more doctors and nurses. 2.8 billion Rand has been reprioritized to a new human resources grant and 1 billion for medical interns. 1 billion Rand has been added to raise the wages of community health workers who will earn 3,500 per month. Finally, about 319 million is allocated to eliminate malaria in South Africa, starting by removing those other little creatures which are troublesome. Government continues to focus on supporting people to own their own homes. Not good English. Funding totaling 14.7 billion Rand over the 2 outer years has been reprioritized to 2 new conditional grants for the improvements and upgrading of informal settlements, which will enable people to have access to basic services. Our Help to Buy subsidy helps first-time home buyers to purchase a home, which is very critical in our society. As a pilot, it receives 950 million over the 3 years. The South African National Roads Agency is allocated an additional 3.5 billion Rand over the next 3 years to improve non-toll roads. In October, I emphasized the importance of the user pay principle. It is a principle that must be upheld. In any future negotiations, this should be borne in mind as we find appropriate solutions. Over the past couple of years, South Africa has been grappling with the issue of corruption. We must root this out. The National Treasury, I'm pleased, Mr. President, to say that the National Treasury and the Department of Justice will work together swiftly to support the establishment of the new investigating directorate in the NPA. My colleagues at provincial and municipal level are working as best as they can to deal with rising wage costs and reduce transfers. Provincial treasuries and municipalities have a partner in the National Treasury to work with on their constitutional obligations. Let me repeat this. Our colleagues in the provinces and municipalities have a partner in the National Treasury to work with them to fulfill their constitutional obligations. The National Treasury is not an enemy of any state institution. It is there as a guardian of the nation's resources and also to facilitate growth and development. There is capacity in the National Treasury to work with the municipalities and provincial governments. Let's make use of that capacity and the willingness of the good hearts at the National Treasury. Grants such as the Financial Management Grant and the Municipal Systems Improvement Grant are available, Madam Speaker. I hereby as well table before this House the Public Audit Access Free Bill in order to strengthen the Auditor General's office and roles. We need to assist the Auditor General in achieving his objectives. That's why I'm tabling this bill together. We need to build a strong culture of payment of for service in our country. And here I look at Deputy Speaker Lechisa and the President and Minister Mfeketo, Honorable Minister Gordon, and Honorable Lekota, and said, you were very good during the anti-party struggle. You were very good. You encouraged our people to fight against our party system, to boycott, not to pay for services. You were gallant fighters. Today, Mr. President, I ask you and the other gallant fighters against our party system to go back to the communities to encourage them to pay for services. Tumamin, I want to lend a hand. I want to be there when the people turn it around. So I'm Tuma to you now, honorable members. Collecting the revenue due to the state is the underlying function of a democracy, of building a nation, and it is our duty to pay for services, as I mentioned. The National Treasury will lead a process to encourage those, including government departments, Minister Ngesi. Government departments owe municipalities a lot of money. So Tumamina, lead the payment process, Minister Ngesi. Please. Finally, service providers must build what they promised at a reasonable rate. We have to be far more strict in the granting of contracts and avoid to be taken to the cleaners unnecessary. So, this budget is also about trying to set out our long-term vision. We spent a lot of money on infrastructure. 4 things can get us better infrastructure. First is to create a sensible project pipeline. Second, streamlining the law to make it easier to build. Third, better information for everyone. And finally, to actually do the job that needs to be done. So far, we are working on a wastewater treatment facility in the Vaal. Immediate lessons learned is that our soldiers can do the work quickly and very simple. But then the departments responsible for releasing the funds for the soldiers refuse to release the funds. So, we'll have to rely on the Minister of Mining in his capacity somewhere to loosen the processes. A solar water geyser program is underway, as is student accommodation. 625 million rand is allocated to the Development Bank of Southern Africa, the Government Technical Advisory Center, and the Presidential Infrastructure Coordinating Commission to strengthen project preparation in this context, and on a speeded up basis. So rather than going around creating too many institutions, we're going to bring capacity to come together at the DBSA to fast-track processes. Details on several priority projects can be found on the Vuleka Mali portal. It's a facility in the National Treasury website. The infrastructure fund is a central pillar of the budget and of reprioritization. It will accelerate 526 billion rand worth of on-budget projects by bringing in the private sector, development finance institutions, and so on. In several instances, the private sector will design, build, and operate key infrastructure assets. In addition, government will commit 100 billion rand over the next decade in this infrastructure fund. But as Amo Leonard, who joins us today from Bloemfontein, correctly points out in a budget tip, infrastructure must be maintained and must not wait till things fall apart. As we look to the future, I see the following shifts in our society and the world. The first, naturally, is the rise of technology and the so-called fourth industrial revolution. 25 years ago, the budget was prepared on reams and reams of paper, carefully stapled together. Those are the signs of the time. Well, things have changed a bit. I can confirm that I reviewed this speech on my tablet. And you can keep track of the speech on Twitter right now. By the way, it is at #RSA budgets. That's where you find it. Who knows how the budget will be prepared in 25 years' time? We need to move with the times. Our budget spending has a focus on getting our country ready for technology. The first step is to fix our education system. Government is rolling out a maths and science grant. The governor of the South African Reserve Bank is driving an ambitious fintech program, together with other colleagues and other financial sector regulators. The sustainability challenge affects us all. Climate change is real. The steps being undertaken at Eskom will allow us to expand renewable energy, and the carbon tax will come into effect on the 1st of June 2019. The third challenge is rapid urbanization. We cannot go on building horizontally. A serious consideration must be given that we begin to build vertically as part of an integrated urban development strategy. The final challenge is nationalism. In many successful economies, immigrants have been a source of dynamism. Narrow nationalism often leads to stagnation. We need to redouble our efforts to attract highly skilled people into South Africa. As Professor Ricardo Hausman of Harvard University says, it talks to the know-how. That when you feel that you don't have the know-how, go out into the world and get it without diminishing your own domestic effort to build your skills. These are complementary efforts we need to get into. We need to free our entrepreneurs from stifling regulations and complicated taxes. We'll continue to work closely with our partners in BRICS, the African Development Bank, and the Southern African Customs Union. Madam Speaker, it is prudent to say that we are a shareholder in a number of multilateral institutions, and this ensures that South Africa plays its rightful place on the continent and the world over. Before I conclude, my special thanks go to the President of the Republic for his leadership, foresight, and a greater sense of interest in the budget process. The fact that you allocated so much time to work with us, Mr. President, is highly appreciated. But you go too much into detail. But that is fine, it's okay. We can cope with that. A word of appreciation goes to the Director General of the National Treasury, Dondo Mukhajana, and his team of young, dedicated people who are really genuine good civil servants. The Deputy Minister of Finance, who always makes sure that I am kept busy and on my toes. Special thanks to the acting SARS Commissioner and the team at SARS for the sterling work that they're doing. We really appreciate it. The Governor of the South African Reserve Bank, the 10th Governor of the South African Reserve Bank, for his support and collegiality. The colleagues in the cabinet, who I found to be amongst the warmest people to work with. I thank you for that. The Ministers' Committee on the Budget, I thank you for walking this mile with us. So again, let's go to the good book. I quote, "Even though we walk through the darkest valley, we will fear no evil, for you are with us. Your rod and your staff, they comfort us." Madam Speaker, we have outlined what our objectives are in this address. We have submitted the necessary documentation that needs to be submitted, and the budget plants a seed for renewal and growth. It is all our duty to tend the seed and see that it grows strongly, tall, and fruitful. It is a budget for the future. This being the case, for you shall go out with joy and be led forth with peace. The mountains and the hills shall break forth before you into singing, and all the trees of the field shall clap their hands. Amen. Thank you very much.
I thank the Honorable Minister. The papers tabled by the Minister will be referred to the relevant committees. That concludes the business for the day. The House is adjourned.
Well, and there you have it. Finance Minister Tito Mboweni has delivered Budget 2019. Has he done enough for us to avert a ratings downgrade, or at least negative perceptions by the ratings agencies? And 23 billion rand per year for Eskom. Is it enough, given that Eskom was asking for 100 billion to be shifted onto the government's balance books? Well, we're going to get some analysis from various people as we go on. For now, let me pass you to my colleague Bulelani Philip, who's standing by with some reaction.
All right, thank you so much, Nombu. We are here just in front of the National Assembly, where we will be taking political reactions from all the political parties. And now joining this conversation, I'm going to call in Steve Swart from the ACDP. The Finance Minister, has it done enough for avoiding this fiscal cliff that you've been warning about?
Well, we know that he had very little room to move given the low economic growth environment that he's in. And regrettably, we see that he had to give Eskom 69 billion rand over 3 years. Now, that was avoidable if one looked, and one has to place the blame for that at the Zuma administration over the last 10 years. Obviously, he could have increased taxes, he could have increased personal taxes, corporate taxes. He did not do that. He increased fuel levy, he increased the sin taxes, and so we are grateful that he didn't increase those aspects. But we are concerned about the increase in the budget deficit. Last February, he said it will be the then minister said it will be 3.8%. We're now looking at 4.5%. That places massive pressure on our government debt levels, which are now looking at 202 billion rand. That is the fastest growing item. So I'm concerned, we are concerned from the ACDP side whether he is able to stick to the strict fiscal consolidation path that credit ratings agencies and that investors are acquiring. But there was some good news looking at reducing the public sector wage bill over the long term, looking at savings of 50 billion rand. But against that, you've got 70 billion rand that is required for Eskom and, of course, the other SOCs. He was very firm about the state-owned corporations, and we hope that he'll be able to implement that and implement the turnaround strategy that Eskom requires, given the opposition that we are seeing from the unions.
Steve Swarte from the ACDP. A lot of food for thought there around the analysis of this budget speech by the finance minister. For more reaction, I'm going to cross to Manelisi on the other side.
Thank you very much, Bulelane. Quite a very, very difficult budget for the Minister of Finance. We have been saying throughout the day that he has found himself between a hard place and a rock. But with me here is the UD COPE leader, Mr. Mushiwa Likota. Mr. Likota, your general assessment of the Minister's statement.
Well, one of the really significant steps that one must take into account is that for a long, long time we have appealed for the reduction of the executive and the bureaucracy, because huge amounts of resources were going down the drain all the time. And I think that the fact that they have begun to look at that is something that we must acknowledge as one of the singular indicators that some measure of sobriety is coming about. It was important that he also raises the issue that all the public service and public state-owned enterprises will not be given money again. The country must determine whether state-owned enterprises which consume huge amounts of resources at the expense of the education of the population and at the expense of the employment of the population. Your education is where you transform your people into transformation agents of society, of the economy, expanding it and so on. If you don't work on that, you don't increase the size of your economy, you don't give jobs to your people, they don't have education, and then of course you must shrink and collapse inwards. I think that was something very important to keep in mind. Linked to the issue of education is the last point he made, although he made a joke of it, but I think he wasn't joking. The fact that he said it's critical to educate socially, to educate the citizens, that they must know that whilst it was the correct thing to undermine agents of revolution and change under apartheid by strike action, by even destroying infrastructure and so on, it is no longer the right thing to do at this time. The schools that were there, however weak they came from apartheid, as long as they were there, our children went into schools, they were getting educated and so on. I thought you should have said something about improving the quality of teachers and teaching, raising the standards of passing and so on. However, on the whole, it looks like they're trying to move. This budget was encouraging and driving in the better direction.
Thank you very much, Mr. Likota. That was the leader of COPE, Mr. Mushiwa Likota, raising some of the issues that were raised by the Minister of Finance here, Tito Mboweni, about especially our state-owned companies. Nompo?
Thanks very much, Manelisi. Well, I'm joined by Lawson Naidu. He's the Executive Secretary from the Council for the Advancement of the Constitution. Thanks very much, sir. Your reaction to the budget?
Well, I think it was a very impressive speech. It was a brave, bold speech, I thought. Didn't pull any punches, and I think impressively he resisted the temptation to respond to populist notions in his budget, and he told the story as it really is. And he wasn't afraid to do so, to tell people that we all need to pull together. So if the seed is going to grow and nourish as he expects it to. So I think it's an important speech and really says government is committed to ensuring that there is fiscal stability as a foundation on which to grow the economy.
Well, a positive reaction there. We cross now to Bulelani.
All right, thank you so much, Nombu, again. Finance Minister coming into this budget speech with a lot of sentiment that is moving through difficult times. But I'm going to bring into picture the leader of the official opposition, Mr. Maimane. You were just saying just a while ago we are in a bad state of affairs. Why do you say that?
South Africa is in a difficult space. 4 out of 10 South Africans don't work. Youth unemployment is at the highest. Debt in this country is skyrocketing to a point where we are borrowing R1 billion per day as a country. This is an indicator of a government that has failed its people, it's looted resources, and today I'd hope that the Minister of Finance would come up with an economic plan. None was forthcoming. He'd come up with a plan about which departments we were going to cut so that we can free up the resources to the people. None was forthcoming. He minced his words about state-owned enterprises by saying we should decide what we're going to do, as if he's not part of the government. We should by now have sold some of the state-owned enterprises so that we can give money to poor South Africans, give it to the poor, give it to the people of this country. It's become quite clear this is a government that wants more of the same but different outcomes. Projected growth this year was already from 0.7 to just over 1.2. This shows that actually the ANC has no plan to grow the economy, deliver jobs for our people, and I would feel that instead of coming out today more hopeful, I feel that South Africans need courage to recognize that if we don't change the government, we'll end up tabling the same budget in the adjustment period for the same outcomes.
Mr. Maimane, thank you so much for your time. Of course, that is the leader of the official opposition. For more reaction now, I'm going to cross to Manelisi on the other side.
I'm here with the Minister of Communication, Stella Ndabeni-Abrahams. The Minister touched on some of the departments which are under her department, some entities that are under her department. Minister, thank you very much for joining us. Hashtag data must fall. Do you agree?
I fully agree, and I'm sure even viewers at home are happy. They've listened to the Minister of Finance's speech. He spoke on the critical issues that will definitely lead to the data must fall. First things first, of course, everybody was worried what's going to happen with SABC, and we're happy to say we're going home happy, baby. But on top of that, the Minister spoke to a crucial fact of making sure that we work together in ensuring that we issue the policy directive in terms of spectrum allocation. And therefore, that means that if we're going to give you spectrum, as much as you're going to pay us, we're going to make sure that you have obligations and data has to fall.
When is the bailout for the SABC coming?
Definitely we can't put in terms of the dates because that's the responsibility of Treasury. What we happy about, the Minister included it in his speech.
Minister, thank you very much for your time. That was the Minister of Communication, Minister Stella Ndabeni. Nombo?
Thanks very much. Well, I'm joined by Vuyani Jahana. He's the CEO of South African Airways. Thank you very much for joining us. Sir, your reaction to the budget speech?
A very good budget, pro-poor budget, but also a consistent picture by the state to support the transformation of state-owned enterprises to self-sustainable entities. So far, I think good outcomes.
And just give us some clarification as to the change that's going to be taking place at SAA in order for it to be more viable and sustainable.
So we are focused on a number of things, bring a greater commercial focus and profit and loss accountability within SAA. SAA has got 3 markets, domestic, international and regional. What we are doing, we are structuring the business units within SAA, no new companies, but specifically bringing more accountability, putting together teams that are going to be dedicated to drive our growth across the continent, at the same time making sure that we continue to lead in the domestic market, and also give greater accountability for profit and loss accountability and commercial delivery to the international markets. 70% of the revenues of SA are coming from outside South Africa. That means that the structure, the governance, the process of taking decision must be more inclusive. That's the change we're putting in place so that all of us are accountable for results.
All the very best, sir. Thank you so much. Now we're going to cross to Bulelani.
All right, thank you so much, Nombu. We can talk a lot of things coming out of this budget, but now I'm going to bring into this conversation the NFP Chief Whip, Professor Nhlanhla Khubisa. Prof, one of the biggest issues coming into this budget was the issue of rationalizing state-owned enterprises. The pronouncement by the Finance Minister, are they satisfying to your party?
Well, they're not satisfying at all. For instance, Eskom at the moment as we speak is technically insolvent. The whole matter of Eskom should have been consequence management. There's been no technical skills and people have not been performing, and we pump money into Eskom. 23 billion a year. In 3 years, it would be 69 billion. The question is, why would you pump money instead of correcting internally within Eskom, bringing skills, ensuring that these state-owned enterprises are well run? You know, the whole concept of unbundling again was not well explained. We were hoping that the concept of unbundling was going to be explained. SAA, for instance, has received about 5 billion, and we have not seen the results. And we are moving towards rationalization instead of ensuring that we get the right people with skills, we bring them in, we ensure that the company benefits. With regard to SAA, for instance, we said there must be an equity pattern that will be brought in to ensure that it works correctly. Now, pumping money all the time, why are they failing to work like land bank, which would borrow and then give back to the state? In other words, there is no way we can say that the rationalization program will work because we are pumping money here. As we speak right now, Eskom is owing over 420 billion. That is quite a lot. And it's consuming, that is about 8% of the GDP. And also it's taking about 60% of the entire budget. So the whole money is being poured there and there are no results. We want to see the result and consequence management in Eskom in particular.
All right, Professor Nhlanhla Khumisa, thank you so much for your time. That is the Chief Whip of the NFP. And now we're going to cross to Manelisi on the other side of the precinct for more reaction.
Thank you very much, Bulelane. And we are continuing with this reaction from outside the National Assembly, where the Minister made his budget statement just a short while ago. I'm joined right now by the leader of the Freedom Front Plus, Dr. Peter Groenewald. Dr. Groenewald, thanks very much for coming. Your take, please.
Well, South Africa is in trouble. We are borrowing 1.2 billion a day, but the interest alone is 1 billion a day. So that means that we don't really have money to spend. And in the end, we pay almost all the money we borrow just for interest rates. We welcome the fact of the stopping of the increases of the wage bill when it comes especially to the executives of SOEs. But we also say that they should have extended it to the senior management of state departments. There are some DGs whose salaries are more than that of the President of South Africa. We are also worried that the fact that they are going to allow early retirement, that we are going to lose some skilled people in our state departments. We need certain skills, and therefore we say that if we look at overall at the budget, the Freedom Front Plus is worried about the debt situation, and we are not so sure that we're really going to create jobs. The Minister should have gone further to make it more conducive for public businesses to come and invest in South Africa. He only referred to certain visas, but that is not really sorted out at the moment. So there was no real matters that has been announced to allow investors to come to South Africa. The land issue, we see that they've put aside about 2.3 and 2.4 billion rand for the getting of land to ensure that upcoming farmers will get some land. We still say that if we look also at 1.7 billion for 262 farming projects, there are so many farming projects when it came to land reform that actually collapsed, that they first have to ensure that those projects are successful before they start with new ones. So in whole, the Freedom Front Plus is worried about the future when it comes to the finances of South Africa. And I do foresee that in the end they will have to increase taxes to get the money. We see 29 cents fuel levy at this moment. That's going to hit motorists hard next month because the other factors in the fuel price will also increase. So motorists in South Africa will have to steel themselves for quite an increase in the petrol levy.
Dr. Groenewald, thank you very much for your time. That's the lead leader of the FF Plus, Dr. Groenewald, touching on the issues of land and the wage bill. Right now we go back to Nombu.
Thanks very much. Well, certainly a very tight rope to walk. And Dennis Dykes, he's the chief economist at Nedbank. He says it was a contractionary budget. Just tell us why.
Yeah, although the deficit is actually going up, a lot of the reason for that is basically the Eskom story. So trying to actually rescue Eskom has obviously led to a big deterioration in the overall finances of government. So even though we've seen an increase in spending, it's really just basically going into unproductive spending, and a lot's been taken away from the consumer.
And in terms of the ratings agencies, has enough been done for us not to be seen in a bad light?
Yeah, look, I think unfortunately the reality is that the finances are very, very stretched. So I think the way that the Treasury has, what they've come up with is actually probably the best solution under the circumstances, but it's going to be a very tight call. My own feeling is that they'll probably wait until after the election, reassess the situation, see what's happening with the restructuring process, and also assess what economic policy is, because fundamentally what we need now is economic growth to get us out of this hole.
Absolutely. Thanks very much, Mr. Dykes, Chief Economist at Nedbank. Now we cross to Bulelani.
Thank you so much, Nombu. Such a lot of talking points right here on the steps of Parliament. I'm going to jump straight into it and invite into the conversation Mr. Julius Malema, the leader of the EFF. You're coming into this budget with 9 expectations, a 9-point plan. Did the minister actually, satisfy those points?
He has not met any of the requirements. The budget was extremely flat, repetition of the same things he has said before, and literally even the codes were repeated, not just issues. And you realize that the minister has got nothing to offer. He can't take us out of this difficult situation we find ourselves as a country. He's still allocating money to buy land when we're busy expropriating land, amending the constitution to expropriate land without compensation. No clear plan on how he's going to create jobs. No, he has not reduced VAT. Everybody else is complaining that 15% is too much. Yet minister comes here and says nothing. He has not increased the corporate tax, which has not been increased over a period of time, leaving the rich to continue to accumulate more than the poor.
The pronouncement on the increases in the social grants, your take on that?
Nothing. I mean, what is 10 rand for child grant? If you are to take the 10 rand which is put as an addition to the child grant, it doesn't buy anything for children, and therefore it's just a joke. The real intervention in terms of social grants will be a complete doubling of social grants. Both the child grant, old age and veterans money must be doubled if we want to have an impact, especially when we're in an era where the levels of unemployment are extremely high. 9 million unemployed people, majority of whom are young people and females, and they've got kids and they want those kids supported, and you give them 10 rand. It's a joke.
Mr. Julius Malema, thank you so much for your time. Of course, that is the leader of the economic freedom fighters, giving us his views on this budget speech. For more reaction, Manelisi is standing by.
Thank you very much. Bulelane, I'm joined now by the UDM Chief Whip, Ngabayumzi Kwangwa. The minister had to do with quite a very tight budget. Did it touch everything we were expecting him to touch?
Well, with due respect, but today's speech was very scanty if you were to consider the very comprehensive and at times ambitious SONA which was delivered by President Ramaphosa a couple of weeks ago. The second issue is that, writing to the Cape Towns in 2007, I once said that beyond the fast approaching hairpin bend, referring to the Polokwane conference, might lie a land of more aloes than the much promised honey. And look at what happened today. We've been proven right because of exactly what we said. We are where we are today because of the ANC's failure to manage contingent liabilities, to make sure that there's proper management of the finances of the country. That's why the debt to GDP ratio has gotten out of control. That's why the budget deficit has also gotten out of control. But we must welcome one move that they've made to say that insofar as SOEs are concerned, it's not going to be a free for all when it comes to giving out guarantees, because that is important, because that was the situation during the decade of Zuma's decadence, the problem was that they were throwing money at the problem rather than addressing the root causes. But what we find to be very interesting as a United Democratic Movement is that in the entire budget speech, there's not even a single word of mention of land. There's nothing about land for a government that was saying recently it was committed to the principle of land expropriation without compensation, and now it seems all of that has now flown out of the window. The other issue which I think is important as a party is that the ANC government, remember during the Bosasa, this inquiry, the state capture inquiry, we're told there that some of the Bosasa monies were allocated or rather rechanneled to the ANC to fund Siangoba rallies. If the ANC government is serious about those issues, they need to try and make sure that they get those funds back from the ANC into government so that all the other people who've looted state resources can do the same.
Kwangwa from the UDM, thank you very much for your time. That was the Chief Whip of the UDM, Nabayumzi Kwangwa. Nompu?
Thanks very much, Manalisi. And so we get some Labour reaction from Matthew Parks. He's from COSATU. Your reaction?
Sure, I think as COSATU we are quite disappointed. We recognize the government is in a serious fiscal crisis. Unemployment is rising, the economy is not growing, the SOE is on the verge of collapse, yet we didn't see one single coherent plan from the Minister today on how to address these ticking time bombs. So for us, this is a huge missed opportunity that we're going to pay for painfully down the road.
Of course, they did give a slight uplift to the social grants. Your thoughts?
Sure, that's just basically for inflation purposes. But we need to move beyond social grants. We need to grow the economy so people are not dependent upon the state. The President convened very progressive, good job summits and investment summit last year, but the Minister barely made any reference to them. He didn't mention how government's going to implement them, how will business be engaged to implement them. In fact, since those summits, we've seen both government and business retrenching thousands of workers. Eskom is on the verge of collapse, government has no plan. SABC is in serious jeopardy, there's no plan by government. The Department of Water Affairs collapsed last year. There's no plan in this budget how to fix it. Metro Rail is almost on the verge of extinction. There's no plan to deal with it. So for us, this is a serious crisis in government. We expected leadership from the Minister, and he didn't provide it today.
All right, we're going to leave it there. Thank you very much. Some dissatisfaction on this side. Back to Bulelani.
Thank you so much, Nompu. From one alliance partner to another, I'm going to invite into this conversation now the Treasurer General of the ANC, Mr. Paul Mashatile. A lot of emphasis in the theme of the Finance Minister is clean governance. Do you think that he's done enough to actually, allay some investor concerns and business confidence?
I think so. We would like to welcome the budget as the ANC. I think the Minister is really, in the tough environment, has managed to still increase spending, but particularly shifting more resources towards the economic sector is very important, because if we want to grow the economy and create jobs, that's where we want the money. And I think he has done exactly that. There will be funding of the infrastructure fund. There's also more money to the land bank for emerging farmers. So you can see the shift to key economic sectors. And I think for us as the ANC, we will really welcome that.
Talk of getting SOEs to get strategic partners will obviously get a lot of people talking. Concerns around possible privatization, the ANC stance on them.
Well, the ANC has already said that we support unbundling of Eskom, but of course we continue to allay fears of people that this is privatization. It's not privatization. We will manage the situation in such a way that there is no privatization at this stage. Even when you bring strategic equity partners, it won't be to the extent that you privatize. We also are going to manage the issue of jobs. We have met with COSATU, with NUM. They've raised these questions about won't this lead to job losses, and we said we will avoid that. We'll also not go the privatization route. So, but Eskom in its current form is not sustainable, and if we don't do something about it, I think we will be looking for more crisis.
Thank you so much, Mr. Paul Mashatile, the ANC's Treasurer General. More reaction now, Manelisi is standing by.
Thank you very much, Bulelane. Standing right next to me now is a man who will have to ensure that all these bailouts and government fiscals generally are spent prudently. Auditor General Kimi Makwetu. Auditor General, the minister has spoken about this Auditor General's bill. I think that gives you some powers to make sure that the government monies, as I said, are spent prudently. Your take on that?
No, thank you very much, Manelis. You'll remember that the Public Audit Amendment Bill was signed into law on the 18th of November 2018 by the President. So as of that date, it became law. What the Minister of Finance was doing today was to table a bill that will lubricate our capacity to meet the objectives of the Public Audit Amendment Act. And those objectives are to pursue instances of material irregularity that we identify in financial statements of a number of entities that we audit, with a view to ultimately get to a point where there are consequences for financial mismanagement in the public financial system. That is the extent of the announcement that was made today by the Finance Minister, is to give us that much needed fuel that will be a concomitant part of implementing the objectives of the Act.
Just before I let you go, Auditor General, how is the situation now? Is there any improvement in managing government finances?
Well, we will be reflecting on the outcomes of the local government as of the end of November last year, during the course of this year. But I'm sure you'll appreciate that the ground is very busy with so many other things now. So we are busy analyzing that, but we do not normally pronounce on those outcomes ahead of them being announced in the public domain. But safe to say that at the latest that we announced in November last year, it was clear that there has not been a significant forward movement as far as improvements are concerned.
Auditor General Kimi Makwetu, thank you very much for your time. It was Auditor General Nombu.
Thanks very much. Well, I'm joined by Colin Coleman. He's the CEO of Goldman Sachs South Africa. Colin, obviously the guys in New York, Standard & Poor's, Global, and of course Moody's and Fitch will be looking at the latest budget. Do you think we've managed to avert a further downgrade into junk?
Look, I think the markets as a whole have watched it. You would have seen during the speech that the rand went from around 14.10 all the way to 14.30 and then back to 14.10 where it is currently. And that tells you, I think, that what the minister has done very admirably within a very complicated set of hands is held the line. He's held the line on the fiscal ratios. There has been some slight slippage due to the Eskom injection of 23 billion for the next 3 years each year, and this has caused the deficit, the fiscal deficit, to go from 4.2 to 4.5%, and the debt to GDP has gone from 59 to 60%. So broadly speaking, within a very challenging set of cards he had to deal, he has held the line, and he's, I think, responded well to the challenges, and the market has responded well to the way that he has delivered his speech.
What happens if the metrics don't improve in terms of economic growth going forward? Surely that's going to get us deeper and deeper into debt.
Well, growth is the million-dollar question. So the fact that we're growing below population growth rate of 2%, so 1.5% this year, 2.1% next year, is underwhelming. And so I think that investors, the rating agencies, and the market broadly will watch this May election like a hawk to see what kind of mandate President Ramaphosa has to implement structural reforms, to get an A-team in place, to manage his administration, and to get the economy moving.
Thanks very much, sir. We're going to cross now to Bulelani Philip.
Thank you so much, Nombu. Of course, we're going to delve into some of the issues that have come out of this budget. Of course, education, health, and social development continue to receive the biggest share of the budget. Now, joining me is Health Minister Dr. Aaron Motsoaledi. Firstly, you must be happy that government continues to actually budget your department quite high up.
Well, they have to. There's no other way. As it was discussed in January in Davos this year and at the AU, that health and economic growth are inextricably bound. If we want the economy to grow, which everybody wants, we have got to stabilize the healthcare system. No country on earth is known that has had successes in developing its economy if they can strengthen the healthcare system. And as I said, I'm happy that this is the resolution that was taken by heads of states at AU just last week. The is that realization around the whole world.
All right, just the allocations for the NHI. We know that the NHI bill had to be sent back by Cabinet. Give us assurances when you expect it to be revived, and how soon can the general public actually start benefiting from the benefits of that?
Well, the general public is benefiting from NHI already. It's only that maybe because many of them don't understand what type of animal. They want to see one day dawning where we say this is NHI Day. And I told them it's not an event, it's a process. Just this week, we have just concluded the terms of reference in terms of the contracting of private sector individuals via NHI to come and help in the public sector where there are shortages. For instance, we have just finished contracting the oncologists. You are aware that we are very short of oncologists in the country, and we said under NHI we've got to use oncologists in both public and private. We've just concluded that contract. It's going to work in a few weeks' time. The second thing, I announced that South Africa has got only 500 psychiatrists, 700 the whole country, and 523 of them are in the private sector. Only 175 are in the public sector, including the lecturers in our medical schools. So that's a very small number. We've just finished contracting those in the private sector to come and help clear the backlogs in the public sector, particularly in our psychiatric hospitals and clinics. That is NHI in itself, but many people might not see it as such. They might believe there is a day on which we are going to stand up and say, hey, this is NHI, wake up, and they look at it, it looks like it's of particular shape and, etc. But it's already on.
All right, Dr. Aaron Motsoaledi, thank you so much for your time, of course, giving us a breakdown of the implementation of the National Health Insurance Scheme. Nombu, I believe you're standing by us too.
Thanks very much. Well, a key recipient of the budget was Eskom, of course, and I'm joined by the chairman, Jabu Mabuza. Thanks very much, sir. 23 billion rand, look, for an ordinary person, that's a lot of money, but is it enough for Eskom?
Look, I think one needs to first and foremost acknowledge with appreciation the government support. It's a support to a very key pillar of our turnaround strategy on the debt servicing side. We appreciate that the minister has been working within a very constrained fiscal environment. He did say they have not been able to collect what they had said to collect. The growth has not been what was expected. So against that backdrop, one needs to see this in that context. 23 billion is about 65% of our debt servicing costs. So it does go somewhere. What it does then call on us is to now go on to the other two pillars in our cost, our operational cost containment, and indeed on our revenue enhancement, which we can now only pray that NESA, when it does decide on tariffs, it would help us in that direction. But one would need to get a bit more details, and we're looking forward to reading in the full budget document what this really means.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Okay, we're going to cross now to Bulelani. To Manelisi.
Especially Manelisi. Thank you very much for that. Let's return to politics now, when I'm joined by the IFP spokesperson on finance, Mkhuleko Mhlengwa. Mkhuleko, when we spoken to you yesterday, you were talking about, in fact, you're worried about the increase of taxes. It looked like the minister heard what you said.
Well, he did, but it's also unfortunate that he did not revise VAT downwards, given the fact that the majority of people still feel the pinch of that. Secondly, there was fewer levy increases which further burden the poor, and the fact that all the social grant increases are very marginal and certainly do not respond to the current and prevailing realities insofar as that is concerned. Of concern, of course, is also the fact that we are spending more than we are generating as a country, and that, of course, forces us now to borrow, because government simply is not willing to cut the fat, is not willing to trim the fat. The state of health of our SOEs is a big problem, given the fact that the SOEs continue to use these these guarantees, much to the detriment, of course, of the fiscus. Whilst the minister spoke very broadly about the need of strengthening controls insofar as guarantees are concerned, we've been down that road before because we would not have given these guarantees to begin with willy-nilly. The issue is about implementation. He speaks about getting the necessary technical skills insofar as getting a chief reorganization officer is concerned for SOEs. But we feel that does not go far enough because the issues are far beyond that. You need to embed good financial discipline, management, and good governance in the SOEs consistent with the PFMA and so on. When you look at the infrastructure build which the minister spoke about, that must be welcome because it says to us government has finally woken up to the reality that it's not a job creator. It must create a conducive and enabling environment for the economy to thrive so that businesses can be able to invest. And you could see that pushback in how strongly he spoke about the necessity to actually cut down on the public wage bill. Of course, we now await the details of Minister of Public Service Administration insofar as that is concerned because we must be able to temper justice, economic justice rather, with the need of economic growth. And so as we push back in cutting down the public wage bill, it would be irresponsible for government to think that that solely alone is going to actually help us in these dire straits. The fact that the minister was very bold about our borrowing patterns, even though he may have made that anecdotally, it's an indication of an economy that is not out of the woods and that the projections are not very realistic considering where we are now and the fact that debt to GDP will stabilize in 2024 at about 60%. That's what's going to invite World Bank and IMF. And so if government does not bite the bullet and get back to the basics, we're certainly going to be in trouble. We are very disappointed at the fact that VAT did not go down, and secondly that he had the nerve, cheek and audacity to increase fuel levies in the face of all these challenges that we are faced with, because all these increases hit hardest on the poor, and we certainly feel that it was not a pro-poor budget. But at the same time, he may of course allay the anxieties of the international community, but we have not gotten to a point where we've created a conducive enough environment for investment.
Mr. Tlangwa, thank you very much. He was pushing hard to get the minister to drop VAT down to 14%. I guess, Bulelane, you have a guest there.
Yeah, thank you so much, Manelisi. We're going to just jump straight into it. I've got next to me a member of the AIC, Mr. Lulama Njaisa. Speaking to you off camera, you're talking about pronouncements on education and how you'd like to respond to that.
Thank you very much, Bulelane. I know we don't have much time, but I just want to pick some few issues now in education. For instance, the minister was saying now they've just budgeted now for the building of new schools. So it's very much interesting because building new schools and renovating other schools now is something different. Because I think now it is better to renovate the schools that are still also already existing rather than building new schools. Why I say so? Because many schools now have been closed. So why do we have to build new schools instead of renovating these new schools so that now we have got good infrastructure in our schools? Again, I wanted to speak about this tender system. I thought the minister was going to speak too much about the tender system. You know, this tender system is killing our people because a lot of money is given to the few people. I thought this was going to have a control over this or to do away with this. And again, at least now he's trying his best now to alleviate poverty. The fact that now there are increases on grants, it means now he's fighting poverty on the ground. People are suffering a lot, so they are very poor. We do appreciate that. So I just wanted now to pick on those few issues. I know you don't have...
As always, of course, touching on education, the eradication of the tender system, as well as other issues of the social security. Nombu, I believe you've got another guest in studio.
Yes, I have. Thanks very much. I've got Isaiah Mhlanga. He's executive economist from Alexander Forbes to give us his perspective on things. Obviously, the minister spoke to the public service division, saying that there are not going to be any increases in salaries going forward for at least this year. and that there's going to be a process of letting people go without penalties. Just speak to that, and how significant was that?
I think it is very significant, particularly if you consider that it's one of the issues that we have been saying is of a big concern, because if you look globally, South Africa has one of the biggest public sector wage bills if we look at countries that we compare ourselves with. So the fact that there is going to be allowance for people that are within the ages of 55 to 59 to retire without penalties, and combined with the natural attrition, which means when people resign, they're not replaced, is going to save National Treasury over 40 billion over the next 3 years. So it's one of the reforms that we have been looking for some years, which we have got now, which in addition to the reforms that are being done in the energy sector, that's quite important. 23 billion given to Eskom per year for the next 3 years is going to provide the necessary support while Eskom restructures itself and allow private sector players to come into the energy sector. But also, if you look at the fact that there is no new support for SAA, there's no new support for the SABC, there's no new support for DINEL, and any funding request that is going to be requested by these SOEs is going to be funded from the sale of non-core assets, which means this is going to be neutral for the fiscals. That is a positive reform. So in general, when you look at this budget, you shouldn't look at the slight deterioration in the fiscal numbers. You look at the structural reform packages that have been put together. So it is a structural reform budget rather than a budget that focuses or aims to consolidate.
All right, thanks very much, Isaiah, for your time. Isaiah Mhlanga, he's he's executive economist at Alexander Forbes. We're going to go now to Bulelani.
All right, thank you so much, Nompu. Of course, we're still taking reactions from all sectors of society. Now, joining me in this conversation is Azania Matiwane from the Progressive Professionals Forum. Of course, a lot of things said in here. Is there any hope that you're taking out of the budget speech?
Of course, there's a number of things that we are taking away out of the budget speech. This, first of all, it's been a difficult budget than any budget that has been delivered by any finance minister, first of all, since the post-apartheid era. The other thing that is important is the fact that we must note in terms of this budget, there's about 238 billion rands that has been borrowed. This is representative of robbery to the future. However, the economic environment that we are faced at the moment, there was quite no other room that the minister could have maneuvered to ensure that we can be able to get more money in order to finance their spending. However, what we like is the fact that the minister has made it very clear in terms of the fears that many people have been having in terms of the breaking out of the unbundling of Eskom. It's not necessarily to ensure that there's going to be privatization, but what is going to happen is the fact that you want to capitalize on the issue of the different balance sheets of the specialty units. So this is one thing that is very positive, and one thing that has been making creating an uncertainty in terms of the markets. So at the moment, we think that this has been a very good budget under difficult circumstances.
All right, Mr. Azania Matiwane. Okay, from the Professionals Forum, basically giving us the position of the organization. And now for more reaction, we'll go back to Nompu.
Thanks very much, Bulelani. So I'm joined by Mark Sevitz. He's from SAICA, that's the South African Institute of Chartered Accountants. Your reaction, sir?
At first thought the budget was really bad, but on reflection, not as bad, but for taxpayers, that's not good. There's absolutely no benefit for taxpayers, but no tax increases, but no inflationary adjustment to the tax brackets. And what that means is if you earn more money this year, your employer gives you more money for an increase, you don't really get any tax relief. So that's not very good for taxpayers, but otherwise not a bad budget overall for the future of the economy.
All right, thanks very much, Mark, for your time. Now we're going to go to Manalisi.
Thank you very much. I'm now joined by the president of BMF, Andile Nomlala. Andile, what's your impression generally about the minister's speech?
Look, I think the speech is, we are looking at a different direction. It's a reformist budget, if I may call it. It's not business as usual. Things are tough. And I think Minister Mboweni is actually the right person for the job to run a tough budget. We like, particularly in the BMF, the part where they speak about the issue of retirement for public service, particularly the old people in the public service. We hope that it will bring in opportunity for black professionals who are younger, much youthful, and we hope that that retirement will also extend to even even the executive, we don't want to see a situation of having average 60, 65-year-olds only in positions of leadership. So for BMF, we are very pleased by some parts of the budget. It was not the common type of a budget, and we're worried, I must say, about Eskom. But what I see has happened here is that they first want to try and do the restructuring of Eskom, and then maybe after put in the money, because as things stand, we can't have a situation where Eskom would only have 23 billion, and that 23 billion is actually dedicated into restructuring Eskom. So let's hope that they would first unbundle Eskom, which is something I support, but it's not necessarily what would do the solution, because unbundling doesn't cap cost, unbundling doesn't necessarily improve revenues, but it's a right thing to restructure and see each business unit on its own, and then thereafter we then put capital injection. So overall, we're very pleased by the budget.
Andile Mlala, thank you very much for your time. That is the president of PMF, Andile Mlala. I understand, Nompi, you've got another guest there?
Yes, thanks very much. I'm joined by Mamelo Matikinta Ngwenya. She's the chief economist at FNB. What's your reaction, ma'am?
I think there were some positives and some negatives in the budget today. Unfortunately, the negatives do outweigh the positives. We are quite concerned about the massive breach of some of the major fiscal matrices. If one looks at the fiscal deficit as well as the debt to GDP ratio, we don't believe that Moody's will take that in a positive light. And I think also just the unprecedented restructuring that's required for Eskom is also a cause of concern. So we're likely to see a negative reaction from Moody's when they release their assessment of the sovereign late in March. So those are the negatives. And the positives that came out of the budget today are, of course, the savings that we saw on the expenditure side, particularly given that 50% of the 50 billion that has been saved is from the compensation. And we also saw that they announced the 100 billion for the infrastructure fund. So those are some of the positives that we have been championing for, but unfortunately I would say the negatives this time around outweigh the positive.
In terms of the positive, of course, what we want is implementation. It's all very well and good to have money, but you need implementation. Even up to this budget now, people are saying, well, there's been government underspending. Surely that's a worry, because the reason why they have funds to spend is so that they can address the imperatives that are needed for South African society.
Definitely, and I think if one looks at sort of the very light restructuring turnaround plan that was offered in the budget speech today, and I think a lot of people will be looking to see if Eskom can actually execute on some of the stuff that they've stated. So I think that will be quite important, because as I said, Moody's might change sort of the negative outlook and may not necessarily outright downgrade, and they might give the state utility some room to actually implement some of the reforms.
In terms of what the finance minister announced around the public service and just letting people go perhaps without any penalties, I understand that this measure and others in relation to the public service may save about 47 billion over the medium term, over the next 3 years. Your thoughts?
I think it's a positive step, because that's one of the components that they've been struggling to reduce for quite some time. So essentially what that means is that the compensation bill then decreases to around 34% of total expenditure, which is quite welcomed. I think it's a great positive.
And in terms of the other SOEs, the government hasn't given support to them because basically they're going to have to apply for support. They've set aside a 13 billion rand contingency plan. Do you think this is a more progressive way for government to deal with it, rather than just chucking money at these organizations?
I think it's quite important for some of these state-owned entities to show that they are working at actually meeting some of the obligations that they've made to the public, to their debt holders, as well as to government. So I think it's a positive step that they're saying, look, you have to show that you're going to restructure and turn the ship around before they allocate the funds.
Thank you very much. That was Mamelo from FNB. We're going to go now to Manelisi.
Thank you very much, Nopu. I'm here with the CEO of Eskom, the parastatals we have been talking about through this week, Mr. Pakamani Hatebe. Thank you very much for coming in. 23 billion rand, that gives you a lifeline, isn't it?
You know, it comes at the right place. It comes at the right time, you know. Of course, we'll have been even more excited if it's more, but in all fairness, 23 billion means that we'll reduce our debt servicing cost by about 65–70% or so. Debt servicing cost at Eskom is about 32 billion a year. So if we get this 23 billion, it means we'll be be saving about 23 on the servicing debt. That money will then be used in key issues such as the maintenance of power stations. It comes at the right time.
Otherwise, how bad are your financial position?
The financials, we're sitting in an uncomfortability, as I've already indicated. If you are looking at our total revenue, it's 180 billion, and total cost is 140 billion. That leaves us the earnings, what we are earning, at 40 billion. But debt servicing cost and debt payment is 50 billion. So we've been borrowing to service our debt. With this 23 billion that is coming in, it means 65% of the debt servicing cost will be paid by government. And the advantage, that is, the government will give us money to manage that. The advantage of that then is that it releases the earnings that we have to deal with key issues such as maintenance, which will ensure that we don't have load shedding. So it is accepted.
Just quickly before I let you go, I mean, can you guarantee us that we're not going to suffer from load shedding in the near to medium future?
We have...
Okay, take your breath.
We had a plan that we set up, and we informed the South Africans that we're going to stabilize the whole thing by end of April, that we're going to put in systems, the 9-point plan, that will avoid load shedding. So up until April, we are working on that. As we are sitting now, we are sitting comfortable. But the problem and the biggest challenge we are facing is that some of the old power stations, they trip. That is from time to time without any indication before that. But we are on top of that. I think the situation is getting better. But up until the end of April, we're going to come back to South Africans and indicate where we're standing.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hatebe. You can take your breath one time. As Pakamani Hatebe, this parastate we've been talking about throughout the week. Nombo, I understand we have another guest with you.
Thanks very much. I'm joined by Sibongiseni Mbata. He's the president of ABSIP. Thanks very much for joining us, sir. What's your reaction to the budget?
Well, I have attended many budget presentations. This was probably one of the shortest, straightforward, pointed, with clarity of what needs to be done. This is not a business as usual budget. It is reformist. It says this is the new path. This is how we're going to do things going forward. Time for continuous grants, putting money into the hole are gone. Work for your money, as also is. So we support the budget, but we will, as ABSIP, tomorrow analyze it thoroughly with the Deputy Minister of Finance, who is our patron in Johannesburg.
Super. Thanks very much, sir. All right, we're going to cross now back to Bulelani.
All right, thank you so much, Nompu. Next to me is Mr. Enoch Godongwana, who is the chair of the ANC's Economic Transformation Committee. He's going to speak to us really around the nuts and bolts of this budget speech. In the main, it's all about jobs, jobs, jobs. Has the finance minister done enough to actually create that environment, especially on the issues of policy certainty?
Let me just say, we are operating in a difficult environment. The economy is not growing. As a result, revenues are falling. He has made the reference to that, about 15 billion rand. But I set myself 4 tests for the budget. The first one was, to what extent are we talking to the issue of restructuring state-owned enterprises? We passed that test and we began to craft a journey that says how are we going to do that. The second test was, to what extent are we staying on the course of fiscal consolidation? Indeed, we continue to stay on the course of fiscal consolidation. The third one, to what extent are we getting a narrative on growth? And that has also been achieved. We're putting a lot of money in investment in infrastructure. We're putting a lot on industrialization in terms of resources. And that in itself says we are taking a growth path. The fourth one is, to what extent are we continuing with our redistributive strategy? And that is contained in the budget. We're providing social security grants and other things effectively. Overall, given the environment, that's a positive budget.
So in the years to come, do you think we'll overcome this difficult period that you're talking to?
I think we are at the tail end of this difficult problem. We're beginning to turn the corner, and in the next few years, we are going to bring this economy back on track.
All right, Mr. Enoch Godongwana, chairperson of the ANC's Economic Transformation Committee. Now we go back to studio. Nombu.
Thanks very much. Okay, well, I'm joined by Mike Brown. He's the CEO of Nedbank to give us his thoughts. What did you think of the budget?
I think, as I've been saying, we know our country has been through a really tough period over the last few years, and right now the economy is in a really difficult place. So you couldn't help but expect to have a difficult budget with lots of challenges and compromises in it. I personally think there were a number of positives in the budget. The ongoing commitment to reform at the Revenue Service, the commitment to reform at state-owned enterprises, some help for Eskom, although by my maths I don't think that's anywhere near enough in terms of what Eskom's going to need over the longer term, and then some talk around commitment to the public sector wage bill, which has become unsustainably high. So I think those were all positives in the budget. The negatives would be, I think, not enough around growth-enhancing reforms. We've still got, I think, far too much bureaucracy in our economy that doesn't encourage investment and entrepreneurship, and also given the deterioration in the particular the situation of state-owned enterprises, we now have the fiscal deficit going up from around just over 4% to 4.5%, and debt to GDP now a little bit higher than everybody thought. And those are all going to be really difficult for the rating agencies to digest.
Yeah. When you talk about the budget, when you juxtapose it against, government's approach to state capture and all the things it's been enunciating, particularly to the investment community, how does this now augur for business confidence going forward?
Yeah, I think it's another step in building the foundations to continue to improve investment confidence. The budget in itself can't be a silver bullet to solve all of those things, but I think it is another step forward in that journey.
All right, thank you very much for joining us, Mr. Brown. Thank you for your time. All right, well, that was Mike Brown. He's the CEO of Nedbank, just giving us his thoughts on what he thought about the budget. Many people saying that it's been a difficult budget, but somehow Tito Mboweni managed to strike the balance. But of course, the proof will be in the eating as we see the implementation of the various policies that were outlined today. Gentlemen?
Yes, Nombu, as you've said, it's been a very difficult period, and I guess even the years preceding this, it's always been said that the finance ministers are operating under difficult conditions. But I guess, as you've said, is that the proof is going to be in the pudding in terms of whether has struck the right chords in terms of satisfying investor confidence as well as local business confidence. So those are the issues we should look forward to.
Manalisa, you spoke to a lot of people. What's the general feeling about the budget, do you feel?
Well, what's good about it is that everybody is dissatisfied about something and everybody is satisfied about something. So I think I would say that it was a balanced budget. Given the fiscal position where we are, and it reflected throughout these positions, whether you talk to political parties or business people. But as they say, we will see if you will manage eventually to fix Eskom, which is the biggest risk, in our economy. Pakamani Hatebe seemed to be satisfied with the 23 billion rand that he will be getting as a lifeline until a further solution is announced very soon, as I said.
Okay, super. All right, so I understand that Bulelani now has a guest. We're going to cross to him.
Well,
okay, unfortunately, he's not yet ready, and so is Bulelani ready? Okay, so now we're going to speak to Peter Moyo. He's the CEO of Old Mutual, and he's just going to give us his insights on what he thought about the budget. Do come through, sir. So we spoke earlier. You said you're an eternal optimist, and how did you feel about the budget?
Well, I actually think, all in all, it was a good budget, and in fact, somebody said it is underwhelming in the sense that there are essentially no surprises. Firstly, but there was actually some boldness. That's actually the other thing that I liked about it. Firstly, we are going into an election. For the minister to talk about controls on the public sector wage bill in a year when we're going into an election, that's actually very bold. For the minister to talk about conditions on lending money to state-owned entities, when you're actually talking about chief restructuring officers, is also a very important thing. But it was always going to be a difficult thing. We did not see a change in the tax rates, so the only way that we are dealing with the incomes there is through bracket creep. So individuals are going to feel it a bit on bracket creep. Yes, we did expect the sin taxes to be raised. He did that, but he's also talked about serious controls. He's also talked about fighting corruption, but also he said in a few weeks we're going to have a new head of SARS. But it was also encouraging to hear him talk about the link between policy from what the president said and the budget framework. So hopefully we are going to see government acting in unison. He also talked about the relaxation of or looking at the visa regime that's actually going to make us more competitive. So all in all, really, I actually thought it was a good budget. Yeah, okay. The corporate tax was actually was not changed, but I think that was also in recognition of the fact that already our corporate taxes are at a high level and the individual taxes are also at a high level. Yeah.
Thanks very much, sir, for your input and your view on what happened with the budget. Now we're going to cross to Bulelani.
All right, thank you so much again, Nombu. Of course, we're taking a reaction from business. Next to me is Tanya Cohen from Business Unity South Africa. Thank you, ma'am, so much for your time. You must have been watching very closely the expectations coming out of this budget. Is it meeting the expectations that as business you were looking for?
So I think we expected it to be a really tough budget, and we knew that there wasn't much space to move in. In terms of revenue collection, there isn't much movement and opportunity. So really, to contain expenditure, the signals that we saw coming out of the minister's speech in terms of containing public sector employment wage bill, it's a good signal. And generally, the containing of expenditure on the state-owned enterprises, we think, is also a positive sign. Also strengthening the accountability in terms of what state-owned enterprises do with those funds. And I think the indication that there's going to be a really deep dive into whether we need all the state-owned enterprises we have, and if so, which parts of them. So that's necessary.
Talking about the rationalizations of these state-owned companies, do you think that privatization is something that you as BUSA would support?
So certainly we think, and if you look to Eskom, for example, partial privatization is certainly one of the solutions. Selling off the non-core, non-strategic parts of the business are important, and actually closing down some parts that aren't necessary. That's absolutely important, because if we don't do that, Eskom is not going to be sustainable. And that's the inquiry we've got to ask across our state-owned enterprises. Like, some of them do not actually deliver to the developmental mandate in the way that they were originally conceived, and we've got to reinvent them in terms of what we need for the future.
Before I let you go, just one last question. There's always been this perception that maybe in the past business had been on an investment strike. Do you think a budget like this would probably make them feel much more easier that they can invest and create jobs?
Look, I think the budget certainly reinforces what the President set out in the State of the Nation. It was a very strong, business-friendly State of the Nation address. I think it indicated that government wants to try and create the environment for business to thrive and to participate in the economy, to create jobs and to invest. So I think the fact that the budget reinforced a lot of those themes is very important, but ultimately we're going to have to see delivery and action.
All right, delivery and action is what you're looking for. Tanya Cohen is the CEO of Business Unity South Africa. I'm sure Nombu is standing by with another guest.
Yes, I'm joined by Isabel Fry. She's from the Budget Justice Coalition, and her focus really is on the alleviation of poverty and inequality. Isabel, of course, Eskom being such a massive responsibility for government to deal with, there wasn't much room for them to maneuver in these very important areas that you look at.
There wasn't much room in which they did maneuver. We believe that they could have maneuvered to a greater extent. Our concern is that the poor and working class are still reeling after the VAT increase of last year, and the child support grant came in with an under-inflation increase, which means that basically the stimulation at lower ground level of the economy economy is not going to happen. People don't have the money, the disposable income. So we're caught in that rut without anything coming through. We really feel that it's a tired budget that came at the end of a tired administration. What we do hope for is that the messaging of people, of the non-orthodox economists that have been coming through in terms of redistribution of the wealth and freeing that up, will be heard for the new administration and the next budget.
How do you achieve an expansionary budget when the levers of raising taxes are difficult to pull?
You look at alternative sources, as I've said, that there is capacity and wealth. You look at investment funds that exist within country. The consensus seems to be that the ratings agencies will be satisfied. So we have to look at borrowing. The dangers of borrowing are well known, but on the other hand, the dangers of raising 22 million people in this country who don't have enough to eat is also an incredible threat that we need to look at and be aware of.
Well, very sober note indeed. Thanks very much, Isabel, for that. And so now we have pretty much spoken to all the people that we need to speak to for now. We're going to go for a quick break.
All right, so a lot going on in Cape Town at the moment. The budget has been spoken, and depending on who you talk to, some people are ecstatic.
Yeah.
A governing party, I guess, no surprise.